Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast with Kate Riga. I think you know the topic we have to discuss this week, sort of, I can't say it's out of the blue exactly. I mean, in a sense, we have known this Jan 6 stuff was coming for 2.5 years. And beyond that, I think obviously, for a lot of the first year and a half or so, or maybe a little longer, we actually didn't know. And that was a matter of great suspense I'm sure it was a matter of great suspense for Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani and Mark Meadows and these kind of people. But among Democrats, Trump critics, just people who don't like coups, it's been a matter of some suspense about, is there going to be any consequences for this? Are you know are the laws going to be interpreted in some extremely narrow way that you say, well, there's no specific fake elector law, so what are we going to do? Or again, what has been in suspense and has made a lot of people on edge and angry and all those kind of things is, are they just going to decide that, like, yeah, it was a coup, but we need to turn the page? And is it more damaging to make the country relive these things, or is it, despite the criminal conduct, is it somehow worse to create a precedent that the incumbent president brings charges, or the Justice Department of the incumbent president brings charges against his predecessor or his challenger in the next election, and all this kind of stuff? But I think, my memory of how all of this unfolded is not necessarily that precise. But my general sense is that we have known that there is a serious January 6 investigation going on, kind of since the beginning of this calendar year. And there's a number of things, just, kind of leaks you hear about, and not necessarily leaks. And sometimes what are called leaks are just the defense attorneys of the people who went before the grand jury, saying that their client went before the grand jury. And that may not be on the record, but that's not a leak. People can, you can talk about your own grand jury appearance. And then you had the appointment of the special counsel, all that kind of stuff. But of course, now we have had Trump getting his target letter. And unless and until, and I suspect until, we actually see the news of indictments, that's about as close as we're going to get to kind of like, it's happening. And one of the additional matters for that, because for those of us who have covered criminal prosecutions and political scandals and so on and so forth for a long time, target letter means it, the actual intent, the reason there are such things isn't just to help out reporters to kind of game out if there's an indictment coming. It's basically a way of keeping everybody honest. Or, sort of too late for probably for the perp, but it's basically so the person who is facing indictment can't come in and say, hey, I came in to talk to the grand jury, you didn't tell me I was going to be indicted, I thought I was just there as a witness, or like I was just kind of nearby or something like that. It's to make everybody, to have that clarity. Like, don't say we didn't make really clear to you you're the one who's probably going to be indicted, and act accordingly. It's sort of like a, lo-fi Miranda warning in a sense, although it doesn't have, just to be clear for all you lawyers out there who are going to correct me, no, it doesn't have any legal constitutional meaning in the same way, but it has some parallels. In any case, I think the other thing that what I was going to say about that is that So that's what a target letter is. And if you're in the business of covering these kind of cases, you know what it means. And yet, none of us are in the business or have really any experience of former presidents facing criminal indictments. So, kind of like, what exactly does it mean in the case of a former president? Well, just what was it, a month or so ago, we found out, right? When Donald Trump got his target letter, and in pretty short order, he got indicted. So I think we know this is coming, and all of the politics that surround that, all of the legal ins and outs that surround that. I think one thing we still don't know, though, is what exactly is he going to be indicted for, assuming he's indicted, and it's a pretty good assumption. And what, if anything, are the various co-conspirators going to be indicted for? One thing I think that we heard news from Rudy Giuliani's attorney that he has not received a target letter. Now, I'm a little out over my skis here in exactly how the procedure works, but I think if you're cooperating, you don't get a target letter because you know they're kind of telling you what your vulnerability is when you start cooperating, if you are cooperating. Or maybe somehow or another he didn't do anything wrong. It's a little hard to believe, since, like, if let's think about it this way. Trump didn't do this stuff on his own. He wasn't able to do this stuff on his own. It's pretty hard to uh, try to mount a coup literally on your own. But as we learned over time, the fake electors thing was something that was kind of umbilically connected to what happened on January 6th. There was, all the hundreds or maybe thousands of people involved in January 6th in terms of actually going into the Capitol complex and all that kind of stuff. But again, it's a pretty open question just what he would be indicted for, what laws he would be indicted under. There's it's funny. I was actually on it's on a TV show. I don't know. I think right after. Wait, God, I'm losing track now. With Neil Katyal about this question, and he made clear, we have federal government spends billions of dollars running a federal election. You can't just try to get rid of it. There's all sorts of laws that cover this kind of conspiratorial action. But in any case, the details are pretty important. What he is indicted for, if he is indicted, and one thing that and we can get into this. One thing that I think is worth remembering, and it's something I think I mentioned in a post. It's quite likely that we are going to find out a lot of new facts about how this all went down. I think we broadly know the outlines, but what's important to remember, first of all, in terms of what the public knows, there's a lot of stuff that is known, but only by people who are following it really, really closely, right? Who listen to every Jan 6 committee hearing, who read the whole published report, who see every single news report on the investigation. So it's quite likely that a lot more people will find out those details if indeed there are indictments. But the other thing is, I suspect we will learn a lot more, and the reason that is because for all the great work that the January 6th committee did, they they had subpoena power of a sort, but not really. they weren't really in a position to compel testimony, or in a critical sense, compel testimony from co-conspirators and make deals. So their power to unearth information is much, much greater than what the Jan 6 committee was able to do. So we're probably going to learn a lot of new things, and we're also going to talk today about the coup supporters, i.e., the House Republicans and the Freedom Caucus, and kind of what's going on with the budgetary stuff and all these, like, kind of poison pill votes about abortion and trans stuff and diversity initiatives and all these kind of things. So we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, let me remind you that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. If you're tired of paying $5 for watered down bitter iced coffee and ready to DIY instead, let me stop you before you Google how to make cold brew at home. Making cold brew doesn't have to be complicated. You can do it without a French press, without a grinder or a scale. You don't even need a measuring spoon. A bean bag bundle from Grady's gives you exactly what you need to make perfect iced coffee. Just drop your bean bags in a pitcher, add water, sleep on it. 12 hours later, you'll have 12 glasses of New Orleans-style cold brew ready to enjoy all week. For less than $1 a glass, it's a no-brainer. The only decision you have to make is it original, French vanilla, or decaf. Ready to give it a swirl? Get 25% off at Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. That's Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. Okay, so Kay Riga, what are we talking about?
It's funny because, well, first it's like greatest friend to reporters, Donald Trump, who without fail, like pretty faithfully tweets out when he gets these Target letters, is pretty a nice aid to everybody in covering this stuff.
Totally.
It's funny because this is now going to be, if he's indicted, his third indictment, right? We had the first one about the Stormy Daniels hush money stuff. The second one was the hoarding the government documents at Mar-a-Lago. We've got this one, and then we've got the other one kind of waiting in the wings, which is out of Georgia, about the kind of specific attempts to overturn the 2020 election there. And Josh, you wrote about this, and I was kind of struck by it across the coverage, which we're now, we've gotten multiple iterations to kind of our data set of indictment stuff is getting bigger and bigger. And it's funny that January 6th does just land a little differently. Like at first, kind of the narrative was the documents case is the most slam dunkiest of them all because there's so much evidence, and we have Trump himself on tape being like, I'm not president anymore. I can't declassify these, but look at them. They're secret, like it's just kind of as much out in the open and cataloged a crime as there is, of everything he's done so far that's illegal. But the January 6th one is different because with especially the Stormy Daniels one, the Republicans were just like, this is stupid. This is old news. This is just vindictive, going after Trump, blah, blah, blah. And I don't even know that there was a huge amount of pushback because I think even everyone watching this was kind of like, if you had to lose one of the indictments, it'd probably be the Stormy Daniels one, all things being equal. But then you have the documents one. Everyone's like, well, that's a very solid legal case. He should be worried about that kind of thing. But then you have January 6th, which is just comes with such baggage that the other ones don't. Like this is the ultimate crime. This is trying to overthrow democracy. This is as bad as it gets. And with it kind of coming back to the headlines, I think it just pokes at this wound everyone has that never really healed because there was no kind of like reckoning. It's like the night of, you had Republicans for about a half second being like, yeah, this is Trump's fault. Maybe we should force him to resign. And then, they get back in line within hours of this happening. And, we have the famous kind of McCarthy sojourn down to Mar-a-Lago and all that kind of stuff. And then since then, it's been, that was that was a bad event. Nobody likes that event. Let's move on for the good of the country. We need to
But like
come together.
it was so bad. Why are you still talking about it?
Yeah, right.
Like, if we agree it's so bad, why are you still bringing it up?
Like,
It's
it's
bad. We just
offensive.
got to, yeah,
Yeah,
it's offensive even to talk about it. What do you think?
exactly.
How
Right.
dare you?
Which is just, politically, rhetorically, a more uncomfortable place for Republicans to try to have to balance versus the other indictments, which they can just meet with a blanket. This is the DOJ going after Trump. What about Hunter Biden? Blah, blah, blah. But, January 6th is just an injury of a different emotional tenor to everyone in America. Like, most people watch this happen on TV. It's just, you don't have to be any kind of political junkie to know the ins and outs of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and it's, one thing that's worth remembering, there was all of this sort of kind of woe is me drama when Alvin Bragg brought his suit, kind of like, oh, Trump's going to get reelected now. Starting it, kind of having this be the indictment. It's such a weak and, such a weak case, blah,
Mhm.
blah, 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 blah. And I don't think it's a weak case. I mean, again, let's remember someone else already did time for this. It's,
Right.
but as is often the case in white collar crimes, it is, look, Hunter Biden would not be facing any indictments or, with these plea deals if he wasn't the president's son.
Mhm.
If this all hadn't come up with, with the laptop, blah, all this kind of stuff. But like, you still can't commit a crime, right? There's no kind of like, hey, not everybody gets, if you are prominent, if you kind of get into into prosecutors' crosshairs, you need to hope you didn't commit any crimes, because they are going to do something about it. And the fact that not everybody who does something gets charged with it, like, it's, life isn't fair, but like, whatever, right? That's just how it is. And it's kind of a you're defrauding the IRS. It's just kind of, it's not the biggest crime, but it's still a crime. And, whatever. And I think with the Mar-a-Lago stuff, I mean, again, what the reason it lands a little differently is, as you said, he's clearly guilty as sin. I mean, it's open and shut from every different direction. And what we know from the cases of non-presidents who get brought up on this, I didn't know, you didn't ask nicely enough, none of that matters. It doesn't, frankly, it doesn't even matter if you did it intentionally. Exactly, the laws are very tight on this. You just can't have that stuff, and people do time on that all the time. But even to the extent that you say, well, ex-president, you kind of do have to ask nicely a few times. They did ask nicely, and then his little valet or footman or whatever, helped him move the stuff around. And then you got the stuff with the swimming pool draining into some of the places where they were keeping all the nonsense. But I think there, for some people, you can still say, all right, he's a weirdo. Okay, it's against the law, but like, as far as we know, he didn't sell them to anybody. So kind of like, whatever. What's the harm? Now, I think that's a pretty weak argument, because we actually don't know. Selling is a very loaded word. We don't know that things didn't get into the wrong hands. But, again, people can kind of say like, all right, it's back now, so let's just move on. But as you say, with January 6th, look, he tried to overthrow the results of the election. And as you say, that's so foundational to everything. And combined to that, we all saw what happened that day. And that's not all of it, but like, we just all saw what happened that day, right? And so this isn't like kind of, you didn't fill out a form right, or kind of, you weren't supposed to have this. Like holy fuck, like what the hell happened there, right? And there's, I remember, I'm sure a lot of us remember, when the Senate once they cleared the Capitol complex, and I'm sure all of us, it may take a minute to remember, but remember there was like National Guard troops basically occupying the Capitol for like a couple weeks after that all happened. Once they got back in control of the Capitol complex, the Senate meets, and Lindsey Graham's given a speech, right? But he kind of famously gave this speech where he said, like, man, I tried sticking with Trump. I tried to be a loyal foot soldier, but like, I'm done. I'm off the train. This was too much. I'm done. And as we know, 2 or 3 days, he's back on the train.
Yeah.
Right? Because of course he is. And as is so often the case, one of the things that you need to do in a case like this is, okay, what's the story here? What's our path back to being on Trump's team? And in the Senate, there was that whole thing of like, it was bad, but like you can't impeach an ex-president, even though we told you to wait till he was out of office to impeach him and all that kind of stuff. And it's bad, but it didn't work. We agree it didn't work. Joe Biden's president. And let's move on. And certainly, and remember we had that whole thing when they were trying to set up a committee.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, well, it's not fair. There's not enough Republicans on it. And well, if you're going to do that, you've got to also investigate the whether Biden really all the excuses, right? And that's how we got here. And they've never really from I was going to say from day one, not from day one, from day three, really from day three, their line has been pretty consistent, which is, we don't want to talk about this. We don't want to talk about this. We're just not going to talk about this. And, now they're going to have to talk about it a lot.
And it makes sense, right? Because part of why they don't want to talk about it is because we've seen in the past couple cycles, Democrats really effectively cast the Republican Party as one of extremists and wingnuts that are kind of the face of which is, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and these kind of crazy people. And like having January 6th at the forefront of everyone's minds while we're heading into this super important campaign season is just another reminder to all but, the percentage of Republicans who still insist that it was, I don't know, anything from tourists wandering the Capitol to, Antifa disguised as Trump people. But for like everybody else, it's just a reminder that like, oh yeah, Trump's people are crazy. Like there are just, even in our super polarized society, it makes people uncomfortable to watch people smash the windows of the Capitol and like poop inside on the floors and stuff. For the majority of people, that's not something they like. And that's not something they like to be reminded of. And it's just an inescapable reality that the Republican position on January 6th, when you can kind of nail them down into taking one, if it's anyone who's kind of like worried about Trump being mad at them, is going to be some kind of squishy, like, most people didn't do anything bad. They were just walking it around. Like, can you blame them? They're passionate, And that's weird. And we've just found out from these past few election cycles that there is a weird threshold that just will not fly in a general election because most people are like, that's a bridge too far for me. I'm not going to like join forces with the QAnon shaman on this one.
Right. And I think what, back in the 2022 midterm, one thing, there was this, and we talked a lot on this podcast, not about, well, about this debate to some extent, but actually engaging in the debate, that there was there was sort of this idea that Democrats who wanted to talk about January 6th as an issue in the midterm, kind of like, yeah, okay, fine, brainiacs, if that's what you're focused on, but really we're focused on inflation, or other people saying, actually, like, yeah, January 6th, but like, half the population just lost basic, well, depending on what state you live in, lost basic bodily autonomy and decisions about reproduction, and that's the thing. And that question between, is it about Dobbs, is it about January 6th, was a really basic
Mm-hmm.
and got pretty angry debate among Democrats. And look, these are both really serious things. It's, you shouldn't needing to be choosing between the two. And I think the best takeaway from the election is that voters answered that, kind of settled that debate. And the way they settled it is saying it's not either or. This is actually these are two sides of the same coin. That Republicans are out of control. They are taking away the basics of things we rely upon. We rely upon, we're going to have an election, and the side that gets more votes is going to win. Like, that's a bedrock thing. In well, again, a little fuzzy depending on what state you live in. We rely on, if you need an abortion, you can have an abortion. If you're midterm in your pregnancy and you have some medical crisis that requires you have an abortion rather than die, you're going to be able to get one. And suddenly, like, wow, all these basic things are these things that we're taking for granted. Suddenly they're getting taken away. And that was, to me, that was one of the most interesting things about that cycle, is that voters did not make the distinction that a lot of political analysts did, seeing these things as, in two separate buckets, as impacting different kinds of people, all that kind of stuff. That they were kind of, it was Republican radicalism. They're not safe.
Yeah, totally. Also, to just kind of tie a bow on this, the news of the Target letter dropped while Ron DeSantis was on CNN, I believe, trying to
I didn't
kind of,
realize that.
he's like trying to do this campaign heel turn where like the big new quote unquote media strategy is to like stop avoiding all real reporters, and that has kind of manifested in like, okay, like he'll talk to Jake Tapper, or whatever, or you make himself look more like a real candidate and not just someone who will only talk to, like, I don't even know, the Florida kind of far right pamphlet or whatnot.
Right.
So not only did it kind of like cut into the showing of the interview, but like it also made it entirely about Trump, and DeSantis's reaction to the Trump indictment. And just another kind of further evidence that this is all about Trump. It's going to be all about Trump, and kind of the same drum we've been beating for months at this point. It's just like, how is DeSantis going to be an actual alternative option to Trump with staying power in this campaign if he has absolutely no idea how to position himself on Trump? And we've captured some of the kind of variations in this, the little like, oh my God, too cute by half little like insinuations, like veiled allusions to things that Trump did badly, that if you haven't been paying like attention to every single minute detail of the past, 6 years, you'll have like no idea what he's talking about. But, and he's doing the same thing now, just kind of the default, this is a witch hunt, blah, blah, blah. They can't help but go after him, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like the weirdest Republican primary where the leading guy is about to be thrice indicted, and absolutely no one is using that as a point of attack at all, except for like Asa Hutchinson.
Well, it's also there's I think I saw this, and I can't remember it now whether it was in that Tapper interview where DeSantis basically said like, yeah, January 6th wasn't great. I think he should have I think his quote was he should have acted more forcefully. And when I first saw that, I asked the reporter who reported it, I was like, you know, in what sense? Like he should have he should have brought a little more firepower to the Capitol, or like he should have tried to I mean, I think he meant he should have tried to shut it down with a with a little more quickly. And that was certainly one of the things that people have said forever, and as I think we see from what we know now, uh, we don't say Bin Laden should have put a stop to the 9/11 plot, right? Like, yes, in theory, but like it was his plot, so like that's a weird way to think about it, right? And in this case, it was Trump's thing, so yeah, kind of. I guess if he would have shut it down more quickly, that would have been better than waiting. But like, you don't expect people to shut down their own thing,
Yeah.
right? And there is always it is, and maybe we will find out more about this if and when an indictment comes down. um it is always it's never been entirely clear to me um just what the plan was, how much, kind of when you really see it you get cold feet, or, and I suspect this is more of it, when you really see it and other people really see it, and people who you think are kind of your allies are saying, dude, what the fuck? Like, what the fuck is happening here? And then you start getting kind of cold feet because you realize the support isn't there. But I'm curious about all of that stuff because it, and I think this is the working theory, that the point of January 6th is that they were running out of time for the fake electors thing to work. And so what you want to do is you want to create mayhem so a Ted Cruz type person can say, hey, time out. This is getting out of control. We're gonna pause and try to do this in 2 weeks or something like that. And rather than it being, hang on, we're going to violate the Constitution and violate the law by deciding not to do this, which we are mandated to do, you can sort of say, hey, special things apply, right? And whatever. Um, and again, this doesn't matter in the sense of like who's culpable or stuff like that. But I have always been curious, how did they see that playing out? Did they expect that it was going to be a little bit more like I think the thing in Michigan was before January 6th, where they had those, kind of Jan 6 type people kind of take over the Capitol building. But state capitals work differently. You can go into you can go into a state capitol in most cases. It's not restricted space, and you can wear funny suits. And I don't remember if they were allowed to bring guns in, but basically you go in there and you just make a commotion and everybody's like, okay, just calm it down. But I don't know quite how they saw that plan shaking out, and that you wouldn't have more people saying, dude, we're not doing this, right? Who knows? I mean, maybe we'll find out.
Right. Um, so we want to talk about a kind of a different side of this same coin, which is the increasing extremism of the Republican Party that's really enthralled to its like hardest right flank right now. And that's been infusing the process of funding the government, which we talked about in a previous episode. We kind of got into the granular mechanics of potential shutdown threats, which our listeners will remember. The first one is in October when the fiscal year ends. And then the second one is January 1st. And in October, they can kind of punt it, use a continuing resolution like they usually do if they haven't gotten all these spending bills finalized by then. In January 6th or January 1st, they can do a continuing resolution if they haven't finished these bills. But if they still haven't kind of figured things out come April 30th, giant sequestration across the board, huge cuts, like big budgetary punishment there. And then, of course, throughout all of this, if, say, the majority Republican House refuses to kind of pass bills that have been agreed to, then we get a standard issue shutdown, which we're all, pretty used to by this point.
And to remind
Mhm.
everybody, when that hammer falls in April, it would mean additional, basically social spending cuts, which obviously Democrats don't like, but it would mean something like 3 times in percentage terms the amount of defense cuts. And that is certainly for Senate Republicans, that's existential.
Mhm.
That is something they can never allow to happen. So point being, and this was always the backstop to that deal, that the consequences for Republicans are much more dire than they are for Democrats, and
Right.
hopefully that keeps everybody in line.
Right. So now Congress has started the kind of like piecemealy process where every subcommittee has to put together, a budget to fund whatever kind of organs they oversee, whether that be the Department of Veterans Affairs or the FDA or whatever. And we're seeing across the board, even some of these subcommittees, which are like kind of snoozeville, usually don't get a lot of attention. It's not a big post for people, so it doesn't tend to attract the big personality fights. I'm talking about the kind of normal functioning old school government stuff with committee hearings nobody goes to and whatever. That kind of stuff is just, and it's long been going this way, but it's really just going totally out the window. Even things that people used to kind of, it was, a pocket of bipartisanship. Now it's like all these spending bills are just getting larded up with these riders that are basically across the board about the same thing. You'll have, if there's any kind of pipeline of abortion funding or abortion like education or anything that is any of the organs under your purview, there'll be a rider against that.
And to be clear, a lot of that is just abortion adjacent
Right.
funding. Like whether or not you have the Hyde Amendment, there's like the federal government just doesn't pay for abortions. It's
Right.
it's like maybe a program mentions abortion or something like that.
Yeah. Or you've got kind of, the big defense bill was that you can't pay for soldiers to kind of travel if they're stationed somewhere with no abortion rights to go get an abortion someplace else. Or the VA has this kind of exception where you can get they'll like fund an abortion if it's putting the woman's life in danger, kind of thing. And so just, the classic metaphor is the Christmas tree. Everyone puts their ornaments on the bill. And in this case, the ornaments are it's anti-abortion. It's almost all of them have some kind of like little clause. By the way, you can't do anything with critical race theory. You're forbidden to teach that, even if it's something that's like, do you guys know what this is at all? Like, why are you putting this in the ag bill? And then you've got anything that includes like healthcare plans for federal employees or soldiers or what have you. This can't cover anything related to transitioning healthcare. Or gender affirming therapy, anything like that. And then you'll have some have like different kind of bonuses, like prohibition about what kind of flag you can fly, aiming to make sure that pride flags can't be displayed, or going after DC specifically with all these different, trying to get rid of DC's abortion regime, and like you trying to get rid of there's attempts to make rights on red illegal throughout the whole district, and there is literally a rider about you can't do that in one of these bills, which is the most like self-interested congressman from who the fuck knows where being like, well, I want to make rights on red, so let's pop this in.
Isn't there so it's basically the entire woke, abortion, trans, DEI, critical race theory megaplex. All of
Exactly.
these, it's funny when you mention about the pride flag. And, one thing about the pride flag is that I'm not sure there's an official pride flag. I mean, there's different iterations of it, but it's not an American flag. And in that sense, whatever, it's just a flag. But talking about banning flags, what really does get to me at a basic level beyond the political signification of it is the blue and black. I'm not sure it has a name exactly. The sort of the
Thin blue line flag.
yeah, the kind of quote unquote pro police flag. And honestly, bastardizations, reworkings of the American flag, especially flown on public facilities, is like really offensive to me. Like, there's an American flag, and that is people have different. Certain people are into sort of like having one hanging off their on their house, and other people aren't. But that's a basic symbol of unity for the country, and our our armed forces fight under it, and that is it's a basic thing about the country, and making an adversarial version of it. I mean, people can do whatever they want. You want to do a nutso flag, fine. You can do whatever. But I'm surprised the extent, like you see it sometimes flying on public facilities, like in different states. You see it flying under the American flag, at the city hall or at the police station or something. And it's really offensive to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I'm the only one.
So the kind of practical effect of these poison pill riders is that this is such a through line from when we were covering the debt ceiling stuff in depth, which is, as we know, ended up being a compromise between McCarthy and really the president. It passed on the backs of Democratic votes mostly. And then you had the kind of Freedom Caucus-y types be pissed for weeks and grind the floor to a halt and give all these kind of remarks to reporters about how McCarthy betrayed them and all this kind of stuff. And now McCarthy doesn't want to do that again because he doesn't want these people to be mad at him. So he's kind of trying to the other way this time. He's trying to say, you can put in all these kind of amendments that they know Democrats like simply can't vote for, in addition to, as we discussed before, writing these spending bills way below the levels agreed to in the debt ceiling law. And McCarthy just kind of like giving this his blessing. He doesn't want to get yelled at again. So what that means is, if you can ultimately get these bills passed through the full House, which is going to be kind of touch and go to begin with, because already in some ways these spending bills were going to be a little bit different, because you have big swaths of progressives who kind of never vote for some of this stuff. When it comes to, we saw this with the defense bill, right? Like a lot of progressives just are opposed to huge spending to our defense sector to begin with. So they always say no. But now with these kind of wider spate of spending bills, it's the hard right that always votes against them because they said, like, we're debt hawks and we don't want to blah blah blah. But McCarthy is like letting them kind of lard up these bills with their own little like we hate abortion amendments, even though many of these people, the amount of time since they've gotten in Congress that they voted for spending bills at all is like 10% or like in the single digits. They're still right now controlling how this is going in the House, how these bills are getting written. And what seems to be kind of the operating theory is that even if you pass, like we saw the defense bill pass last week with the abortion stuff and everything, even if the House can manage to pass it, everyone's just kind of waiting for like the big boys and girls in the Senate to be like, okay, we're going to write something that can actually pass that is more kind of premised on the bipartisan way these bills used to work. And we're going to send that. And then your version will come to the conference committee and we'll reconcile the two and all the offensive stuff will fall out. And then you're left with a product that is like fine to mostly everyone. And then you pass it by cutting out these like hard right-wing people who won't vote for anything unless it's like, tucked into a national abortion ban or whatever.
Right.
So, it's this, and like on top of that, which is just the House kind of writing themselves out of any kind of relevance and also extending what used to be the more kind of low hanging fruit part of the funding process and stretching it out for weeks, all of which makes what we talked about at the beginning, the shutdowns and later the sequestration, all of that gets more probable if this is taking forever and they're blowing all the deadlines. But it's also this thing that we've talked about a lot, which is like abortion is not proving to be an electorally super great issue for Republicans. And yet they're making every single fight about abortion restrictions, about going after trans people, about CRT, about these things that are so in the purview of their kind of like super online brain wormsy Newsmax and Fox watching constituents that I think would still sound pretty alien to even like the majority of Republicans, not abortion so much, but the other like super specific trans therapies and that kind of thing. So it's like this combination of going directly at what has proven to be electorally pretty toxic for your party, plus a smattering of like super online DeSantis campaign kind of priorities and being like, that's where we want to focus. We want to say like we're holding up, whether it be funding for veterans or the military or farmers or what have you, because we're insisting on getting these like niche kind of polarizing amendments on, which is all that anyone's going to be talking about, which will probably ultimately fall out of the bill by the time it comes time to really pass this.
Yeah, I mean, as is often the case in situations with these kind of dynamics, it's been fine for people in the Freedom Caucus. They haven't had any problem with abortion politics. I mean, you may end up having an exception to that with Lauren Boebert because, as we know, she is like almost. I think she's almost unique in the Freedom Caucus in that whole scene of having a swing, being in a swing district.
Right.
I mean, she won her last election by like 400 votes or something like that. But generally, it's fine for them. They're not losing any sleep over it. And you do have this dynamic, which we see again and again from the GOP, that they allow a couple dozen people from the Freedom Caucus to define major legislation, which they will not end up even voting for.
Right.
Which is, something the GOP has to work out. But I assume McCarthy's, how I interpret what McCarthy's doing, not with a lot of dignity, but that's nothing new, is that he's saying, look, my one job was not being responsible for a debt default. Got that. Like I did that. Okay. I did the big one. And now you're all mad at me. So, okay, just get it out of your system by marking up all these appropriations bills and kind of load them up with anti-trans stuff and abortion stuff and CRT and everything else under the sun. And this is just going to get worked out somehow or another in the fall. and maybe there's going to be a shutdown, maybe there's not, but like whatever. I was, I avoided the debt default, which really was my job one. Got that. You can't bring that back. And I mean that does seem like it, because kind of go at it, guys. Write these things up. Eventually, um, you know, you probably aren't even going to be able to get, at least in some cases, all Republicans to vote for these bills, since you've got certainly enough House Republicans in Biden districts or near Biden districts who are going to be a little iffy about this stuff. And you go back to the point we just made, which is you Freedom Caucus guys aren't going to vote for it anyway. So you're going to need some Democrats, since you have a 5-seat majority. So again, that is one of the cardinal things about Kevin McCarthy, is like, each fight to its own day. Right? I got past that thing. Somehow or another, we're gonna, maybe there's gonna be a government shutdown, like it's happened before, but compared to a debt default, it's not that big a deal. We've done it before. And that's kind of it. And as you said, you've got who is it? It's Susan Collins and
Patty Murray,
who they're the kind of the designated grown-ups here. And as I understand it, and they are sort of very conspicuously doing this, at least they're kind of putting out the word they're doing this, that they are just writing a normal bill.
Yep.
Kind of like what will actually happen bill. And the whole shutdown drama is really just about how much antics are there going to be between where we are right now in kind of choose your adventure appropriations bill land, and where we're actually going to end up, i.e. the Collins-Murray bill of actually the government funding and it does seem, I mean, who the hell knows? I mean, it does seem like we're going to get to a thing where probably most Democrats and a little lower percentage of Republicans in the House eventually vote for the thing, and that kind of meets everyone's needs, and then that's it.
Right. I mean, because there's no other way to pass stuff in a split Congress, right? Like you can kind of do all the right-wing House pandering you want, but that's never going to pass the Senate. So the only way to do it is kind of to cut the terrorists out of the equation and let them throw a tantrum again or try to unseat McCarthy. And one thing that I think is so striking is the old carrots that would kind of get even these kind of people to play ball to some degree were, I mean, first of all, just gerrymandering has made the vast majority of House seats completely uncompetitive. So there's really no, there's no incentive anymore to be anything but what the hardest right people want you to be. Because if you're in like a Trump plus 30 district, like, okay, you can just do this online stuff all the time and it doesn't matter. But the other thing is that people used to have a stake in it because you wanted to shovel money back towards your district. You wanted to get your project funded. So when this bill comes out, you can say like, and Representative Riga secured $3 million to rebuild the bridge. Like, here you go. You're welcome. Good job electing me. Look how helpful I am to you.
Basically, yeah.
But that stuff is also becoming more rare, and I do think it goes hand in hand with like the Republican Party just abandoning the kind of all the tenets of like quote unquote policy that used to make up the bulk of the job. And I'm not even talking kind of like big comprehensive national policy, but the kind of stuff that's like, if you come from a district where is a big fishing culture, then you're going to kind of spend your time in Congress trying to make sure you have like clean water and subsidies for fisher people and like try to kind of make that your thing so you get reelected. And that still happens to a degree, but not the way it used to. Like, you do have this new crop of Republicans who literally all they do is like put out anti-Hunter Biden resolutions and kind of like leave it at that. I always go back to, he's not in the House anymore, but the Madison Cawthorn thing where he only hired a comms team and not a legislative one, like
Right.
that really is the theme for this kind of like post Tea Party crop of hard right authoritarian Republicans, especially in the House, because obviously it's harder for those people to get elected to the Senate.
It's not a major part of this, but a significant part of this, and this is something that goes all the way back to, God, I guess it was in the first decade of the century. I wanted to say it was the 90s, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't the 90s. Earmarks.
Mm-hmm.
And what an earmark is basically you put into a transportation funding bill, or maybe it's not a transportation funding bill. You put a little line that says, the broken down bridge in Josh's district is going to be fixed with a budget of at least $3 million. And that is, as you're saying, that's the kind of thing that when things get jammed up, it brings people along.
Mm-hmm.
Someone in leadership says, Josh, what do you need? What do you need? What is going to really help back home? And I say, well, there's that bridge. That bridge is a problem, and it's going to get it fixed. And then I'm going to be able to put out a press release like, Josh, Representative Josh got the bridge fixed. And that was earmarks was portrayed as this sinkhole of corruption. And it was true that there were some cases of representatives, getting stuff into, getting stuff into bills, and some lobbyist had paid them to do it, or paid kind of too closely aligned their political giving with it and stuff like that. But that's just a reason you shouldn't be corrupt. That's not, and in some way, it's a funny thing because there's so much now of, and this, this even gets into the stuff we've talked about with the courts, about the power of Congress. Normally, there is a huge thing now among Republicans about, the deep regulatory state, that these nameless bureaucrats in the federal agencies are doing their own thing and not listening to maybe not listening to the president, maybe not listening to elected leaders, all this kind of stuff. There's some, I was going to say CRT inflected, but even not that. Look, let's look at it in a very practical sense. I'm sure there are people in the Department of Transportation who come up with national priorities about what we're going to rebuild and what we're not going to rebuild, and which bridges are we going to focus on, and what are we going to build them out of. And they should be doing that, right? Because why else have a transportation department if you're not coming up with well thought out national policies? Earmarks are a way to say, okay, Congress here, really specifically, you need to build that bridge. You need to fix that bridge. Now, people call it pork, and yeah, it is at some level, but that's also that elected representatives, I've got a coupon. It's my vote. And I'm going to go up there and say, hey, the bridge needs to get fixed. And maybe the bureaucrats, and I say that in this context, not in a sort of a demonizing, denigrating way, but just, the people coming up with the plans of the Department of Transportation, they're not focused on that. Or maybe there's some policy reason they think it's not the most important bridge to fix. It's something that should happen. it is a ridiculous thing for Congress itself to get rid of, just for really good democratic responsiveness reasons. But it also ends up, and again, it's basically things have broken down because country's so polarized, gerrymandering, Republican Party being dominated by total crazies. But it does come into effect that one of the tools that leadership has is to say to some, recalcitrant person, what does your district need? What's going to make you super powerful, not powerful, well, maybe powerful, super popular? What problem can we deal with? Is it the lead pipes in your district? Is it the bridge that hasn't been fixed? Is it some money to the little military base in your district that's just kind of overgrown with weeds, that we're going to do some economic development, we're going to bring some jobs, there's going to we've got this new jet fighter, will we'll make the seat in your district bring in 500 jobs. That's a way that things got done, and not got done in some corrupt or bad way. There's a lot of these things are not just how it works or the only way to get things done, but there are good ways to get things done.
Yeah. And I mean, we've made fun of before the kind of like all the waxing lyrical about bipartisan and an age of comedy and how this stuff is bygone. And, a lot of that is fine to make fun of. But also in a foundational way, some of this kind of like aisle crossing stuff was just how you got things done, because you can't do things with one party, especially if you're in the minority in one of the chambers. And so a piece of this is like you kind of have the chair and the ranking members of these subcommittees who got along fine, right? Because it's not, the Republican tends not to be a Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever, and you're just kind of banding together to try to fund rural improvements or whatnot. And now, while I've been reporting this story, I keep hearing tales of like the Democrats walk into the markup and have, something like all the money that was going to go to these like LGBTQ resource centers, like that's all being stripped out. And they would have this kind of sprung on them by a member and staff on the Republican side with whom for a long time they kind of like, they thought they had a good working relationship. They thought that they could kind of do this non-dramatic, boring nuts and bolts stuff relatively painlessly. But the combination of the yanking to the far right and just the sheer like nationalization of everything that Congress does, even the stuff that used to be on like the local level, like we've been talking about, just it's trickling down into everything, even the places that have not generally been sites of these kind of like big televised hearings that are partisan blowouts that people can turn into campaign clips. Like it's living there too now, even when the the Republican chairs are not particularly right wing themselves. But as we've seen, and as we keep kind of making fun of, like the quote unquote Republican moderate has not seemed, willing or able to stand up to any of these kind of far right impulses. And so every time they just keep going along with it, and letting the infection just spread to even to the corners it hadn't yet really fully infiltrated.
Yeah, and I would think in this case that those, I mean, it's hard to even say like what counts as a moderate now
Yeah.
in the House GOP, but I would assume it's not just a matter of like they're going along with it. I would, generally speaking, if you are a committee chair, especially in the GOP caucus, if you're a committee chair, you have to have a good relationship with McCarthy. That's just how it works. And I assume what has happened behind the scenes is McCarthy goes to Chairman X and says, look, these Freedom Caucus guys are totally having a tantrum. You just let them kind of help them do whatever they want. This is going to allow them to kind of get it out of their system, make a lot of noise, get a lot of headlines. So I assume that it's not just that not standing up to them. They're being told by the leadership, kind of like, give these guys all they want. And in a kind of a perverse House GOP context, it makes sense because McCarthy's thinking we've got to give them some room to have their tantrum, and we've got to give them something to say. McCarthy sold us out, but more, we're showing him now because we're going to the mat over the the Gay Teen Crisis Center in Akron, Ohio, or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, it's coming from on high. This is what he has to do to give them some venue to have their tantrums in, because he doesn't want them to have the tantrums at him and cause all the problems that that might. So
exactly.
there you go.
Yep.
So is that, I guess we've covered some pretty good ground. We covered the January 6th stuff. It's possible we're recording. We had some scheduling issues yesterday. And so we're recording the pod a day later than normal, but it's possible we could have big January 6th news by the time we record the next podcast. I don't remember exactly how long the hang time, for lack of a better word, of the last Target letter was, but it everything kind of came together pretty quickly. So if there is more, well, we might even do one of these Instapods. We've been talking about doing more of those Instapods. So, we have one of the things we've done a few of them over time, but we're probably going to do, and give us feedback on this, right? Kind of what you like, what you find useful as listeners to the podcast. But basically what we're talking about is, when there's some big news, sometimes we'll just say, hey, let's just do a quick pod. It'll be like 15 minutes long. We'll kind of do a quick run through of what we know right now. So if Trump is indicted sometime before Wednesday, we might do that. But even if that doesn't happen and there's no need for one, give us a sense, give us a sense of what things about the pod you like, and whether you find those kind of little mini versions between the main episodes helpful. And remember that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. You can get 25% off on any order by using the promo code TPM when you go to Grady'sColdBrew.com. Again, promo code TPM. And I think that's all we got for this week.
All right. See you soon.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.